So I'm talking to Patsy Cameron, who's a historian and has kinship relations with the clans who live in this region. Patsy, if we turn the clock back 250 years, 50 years before the first Europeans came along this coast, what might we have seen?
Well, in this part of the coast we would have seen a clan that lived in this area, and their name, the clan's name was the Paimērana people, and they, well, we would have seen probably lots of family groups living near the coast. The women would have been diving and hunting their main meals of crustaceans and food from the sea, and the children would have been playing on the rocks, no doubt. And inland we'd have seen lots of fires and smoke from fires where the men would have been burning off land in their traditional way to revive the country and care for country. They would have been hunting big animals. The emu were quite significant in this area, and the large forester kangaroo. So the men would have been hunting those larger animals on the plains between the coast and what's now known as Mount Ochre. The clan country is Rautalita, and that clan country extended from the Great Forester River to the west, to the Tomahawk River to the east. And the thing about, well, what's significant about clan country is the names of those areas would have had clan names, which are probably not so well known today. So on country we would have seen lots of activity going on in the hinterland with the men hunting, and on the coast with the women collecting foods and just living a very rich and bountiful life, you know.
Right, thanks. That gives me a very good picture of what it must have been like.
Interpretation of the Coastal Plains nation, which includes Waterhouse Island, which is Waitakabana. It shows in colour the different clans that made up the Coastal Plains nation. So you can see I've got 8 clans there. The clan that we're looking at now, that were the territory or that belonged to this country, is in the bright pink, and that's the Paimērana people.
So Patsy, we're standing here back inland from Waterhouse Point. What can you show us about this part of the country?
Okay, so from about a kilometre inland, you can see the flat plains, which where the men would have hunted their emu and kangaroo and wombat. Further on, further in the distance, you can see Mount Ochre, that rounded peak there, very significant in the landscape. You're looking over the lands of clan, where the clans people lived. It's not just stone tools that are found that are significant, that tell us a story of people being here, of the clans people living here. They are significant, and just in that little short distance of a couple of 100 metres walking up from where we parked the cars today, I picked up at least 6 beautiful tools, scrapers, which would have been used for a number of things like cutting and scraping and what have you. But it's not just the stone tools that are significant, it's all country is significant. All of the mountains are very sacred and significant to clans people, the hunting grounds. You don't need to find stone tools to know that all of country is significant to the people. We're at the edge of Blackman's Lagoon, which is one of the lagoons that exist today in the Waterhouse area. This lagoon and lagoons like this were really important to the clans people, and especially the women, because the women used these lagoons to harvest swan eggs and to get swan and ducks, and it was absolutely teeming with waterfowl, very rich areas. The women would build their huts over probably on the lee side of the lagoon, and the families would spend quite a lot of time of the year here. Very significant in the heart of the Perina people, the Pimerina Perina people. The clans people lived here. The men would go hunting into the hinterland, and of course what we're looking at now has changed quite significantly in the last 200 years, and now we've got open farmland where once there were many more of these lagoons which have been drained to create the farms, and lots of open woodland, and the men, that's where they would go and do their burning and what have you. So it's hard to imagine what it was like going through this country today, but there are still remnants of very significant vegetation, and one of the vegetables used as a rich food resource is this water leek, which grows in the lagoon. You can see it growing quite thickly around this lagoon. And I'm going to just pull one up here. And just add to my collection today. These were roasted on coals and eaten. Very sweet, sweet flavoured, and I'm sure a great favourite of the clans people. And as you can see that it's quite thickly vegetated in the lagoon itself. Called the water leek. There is an Aboriginal name for it, and Robinson describes it being roasted and eaten while he was coming, when he was in this area. So around the edge of Blackman's Lagoon is one of my favourite areas to collect a river grass or a lagoon grass, which I use for making baskets. You can't see it today because the water level's risen. The grass, the reed has died off for the winter, and it'll start to shoot when it gets warmer and the water recedes a bit. It'll start to shoot, and when it gets quite lengthy, about half a metre or so long, I collect it and then hang it up to dry, and then make my baskets using that reed. And it's interesting that the reed is also found on Gun Carriage Island and on a couple of places in the Furneaux Islands, in little watered areas. But I've got the feeling, that they may have been transplanted from places like this by the women who went to live there with the Straitsmen, so that they could use the reeds to make their baskets. The reeds that I've gathered here that are called the river reed or the lagoon reed, it grows around those lagoons at Waterhouse, and it's really quite substantial. When you collect it, you have to dry it off, so it dries off, but it's really quite tall and beautiful reed. So the first thing you do is dry it off, and then when it's dry enough, you then have to rehydrate it a little bit, and to make the string, or to make the baskets. So these baskets are made out of the river reed or the lagoon reed, and they were used for collecting shells or collecting seafood. Some of the bags were that the women made were very similar to this one that I've done. This would have been used to take into the salt water, because it would have allowed the water to pass through the open weave there. So perhaps we'd use this to collect muttonfish or abalone with. These are Ballawinnie stones, or they're women's stones for grinding ochre, and in this country they're called Polurlewin stones, and the ochre's called Polurlewin. Robinson mentioned when he was on Swan Island that he was woken up every morning with the noise of the grinding, because they would be cracking the ochre. So we grind it up into a very fine powder, and then it's ready to be given to the men, or the women use it. The men would mix it with grease from the possum or the mutton bird or the penguin. Even the cracking open the leg bone of a kangaroo and getting out the marrow and mixing it. They would then layer it on their skin and use it as a waterproof, for waterproofing and for warmth. So grease and ochre is what they used for waterproofing their skin. It was used in ceremony. They rubbed it into their hair and had ochred locks. So when they had enough ochre ground up, you can see it's a lovely powder. It would then be mixed with grease and then put on the skin or on the hair.
In 1798, Bass and Flinders, sailing in the Norfolk, proved the existence of Bass Strait and that Van Diemen's Land was an island. This event was to have a profound effect on the Tasmanian Aborigines' way of life, as it led to the establishment of permanent European settlements. At Georgetown, you can visit Bern Cuthbertson's replica of the Norfolk, in which he reenacted Bass and Flinders' 1798 journey. Many of the coastal features along the north coast of Tasmania were named by Bass and Flinders, including Waterhouse Island, named after Captain Waterhouse, whom they'd both served under. Further to the west, they mapped the Tamar River, which later led to the establishment of Georgetown and Launceston. Bass and Flinders sailed along the northeast coast and went on to circumnavigate Van Diemen's Land, as it was then called.
Well, remembering when Bass and Flinders were here, the Port Jackson sealers were over on the Bass Strait Islands hunting seal. In fact, there are lots of seal around Waterhouse Island. So the next contact was the French explorer Nicolas Baudin, who came by this part of the coast. There were two ships who came past here, and that was in 1802. And the scientists on board the two ships noted again the large smokes and the fires on the coast, that the coast was all burnt. They also noted that there were huge seal colonies around Waterhouse, and that the seal were quite tame and hadn't been obviously bothered too much by 1802 by the Port Jackson sealers, because they were quite tame, and they also noted large muttonbird rookeries on the island. They didn't make contact with the people though, even though they saw signs that the people were here, and they noted that by the smokes there must have been large numbers of clanspeople on the island. When it came to James Kelly getting a commission to go around in the Elizabeth, to sail around Tasmania and to note where the resources of trees, and mostly I think it was timber resources. He actually went to Clark Island to get George Briggs to be one of the oarsmen on the Elizabeth. And so George Briggs accompanied Captain James Kelly, and three other men, and they were the oarsmen of the Elizabeth, and they actually rowed around this coast, and further to the east at Cape Portland, several smokes were seen on the beach, and George Briggs was encouraged to go ashore and speak to his father-in-law, who was Manalagenna. George Briggs's wife was Manalagenna's daughter, Woitamoitiena. And the next visitor to come by this way was in 1830, was George Augustus Robinson, and he was commissioned by Governor Arthur to circumnavigate Tasmania, to make contact with all of the clans that were free in the bush at that time, to try and get them to go under his protection, because otherwise it was at a time by 1830 the clanspeople had been absolutely decimated in terms of their numbers. So Robinson only had two local clanspeople from the northeast as he came through this area in 1830. And of course he was following smokes because people were still, this small group were still burning country. And when he came across this first group, it was included Manalagena, but it also included several other groups from different nations. So, you know, they were not just the northeast people by 1830. They were only small confederated groups. These groups were aware of the military operation going on because they were told about that military operation. They knew about the roving parties because the roving parties were out, you know, continually over a number of years. So when Robinson said, you must come with me or you'll be shot by the soldiers, then what choice did they have? The first step into exile was on the 1st of November 1830 when Robinson took the group out of Anson's Plain there and onto Swan Island, and on Swan Island was the first place they were taken into exile. The other place that was used for exile was Waterhouse, because another group was taken to Waterhouse and left there until taken to the Bass Strait Islands. So
that would have been those two, as you say, those two movements of moving the Aborigines to those islands. That was the beginning of basically their exile from their homeland.
From their homeland. So, and many were never to see their homelands again or to walk on their country. Manalagena did come back in 1831 to help Robinson locate another group in the northeast that he knew was at large, and Manalagena actually located that group, including Multihilagena, who was the leader of the Stony Creek Nation, at Little Pipers River in 1831. By 1831 there wasn't many clanspeople who were as free in the bush in the northeast. In fact, there wasn't many clanspeople between Launceston and the Tamar River and the Derwent River in a straight line following the Western Tier.
When the last Tasmanian Aborigines in the northeast were taken to Flinders Island, it was hoped this would stop the conflict between the European and Indigenous people. But there was a high price to pay for this peace. The first 51 Aboriginals were taken to Flinders Island in 1831, and they were joined by another 154 Aboriginals in 1833. However, poor conditions at Waibelina, introduced diseases and the loss of clan culture resulted in many deaths. Few children were born, and after a petition to Queen Victoria in 1847, the surviving 47 Aborigines were moved to Oyster Cove Station. However, mortality increased, and by 1869 there was only one surviving Aboriginal.